Not Quite Right features discussions that are unfiltered and uncensored and may include themes that are inappropriate for younger listeners. Also, I swear a lot.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
Welcome to Not Quite Right. My name's Ed.
And I'm Amanda.
This is Daredevil number 4 for our January 2025 Not Quite Right prize for Flash Fiction round. And as a reminder, our prompts for this round were that you had to use the word ring and the action prompt, opening a door. And the anti-prompt was break the rule, write what you know. And so our daredevils are those who have signed up for the honour and privilege of having their stories dissected and torn apart on the podcast.
Drawn and quartered, you might say.
Exactly. Our victim for this round is S.A. Braden, who's a first-timer for the Daredevil package, but who has entered as well in the October round.
Okay.
So second-time participant and has opted for the humiliation of being featured as a Daredevil. And so S.A. Braden's story is called Say the Words, and Amanda has the privilege of reading your story.
We've not stayed 21 days in a village since the catalyst. The day the doors opened and breathed forth fire. Fire and creatures we don't know that emerge from inky black. They take many forms, always appearing at random. I'm sure this is one. Let me kill it. I'm talking to Egret, but I make my voice loud so the remaining villagers can hear. It's a child, Amethyst. Egret sheathes his jeweled sword. I can hear the steel ring against its scabbard. The reverberations trigger my sight. Fires, seething, writhing in black night. Grief-stricken cries emanate from truss broken. Blood, wine red, spilling into puddles. I choose to help the child. Regardless of any past actions committed by this girl, we have an obligation to those in this world. The village elder makes his intention clear, signalling an end to both my sight and any objection. Little one, do you have a name? As if on cue, this girl whimpers, and the dark clouds seem to cry too, and the village, what's left of ramshackle wooden homes, begins to smoulder. Lita, she says, and I want nothing more than to kill her. Kill them young before they turn feral, turn into something with an insatiable appetite. Egret rests his hand on my shoulder. I know my face must be fire and rage. I exhale, choosing to trust him. This is not that, Egret whispers. A couple, husband and wife, break away from the assembled crowd. Lita was our daughter's name. The husband's voice full of sorrow. And I can't help but notice how much you look like her. We lost her in the fires moons back, but it'd be our honour housing you. Lita's face, damp from the midnight wet, beams like the sun. 7 moons have passed since Lita's arrival. Egret and the rest of the party is antsy. He's taken to brooding and silence. Maybe it's because he knows why I want to stay here in this village. I haven't asked, but I haven't needed to. I'm waiting. Egret thinks I'm wrong. This time will be different, he says. I know it won't. We were half a night through the second moon when fire and the smoke of death began to fill the sky. Lita, stood watching the elder's house burn. The elder, dead. It holds his daughter, a demon from the gates. I wanted to repay your kindness. It spoke to the couple. face blank. You mentioned you lost your daughter, so I thought I'd give another little girl back to you. Egret disarms the demon, snatching the elder's girl from it, all in emotion. I wonder how he can see clearly enough to do so with the smoke, and in between tears. I wonder how he can see past his mistake, and if he blames me for being right. You won't stop me this time? I ask, readying myself. Kill it. I say the words, and my eyes reflect fire.
So thank you, S.A. Braden. And S.A. Braden has left us a voicemail message, which we'll play for you now.
Hey, Ed and Amanda. It's S.A. Braden from Sunnyside, California. I hope you guys enjoyed my story to a degree. I know fantasy is not generally your thing, but I'm interested to see what you guys think and any tips you can help me to improve my craft and get a sharper story in 500 words. Cheers.
And we also have some comments from S.A. Braden in the brief explanation field, which we'll share with you as well.
This particular set of prompts was difficult. Write what you know. Well, I know nothing of shape-shifting demons and otherworldly gates, portals, doors, so I thought it'd be fun to experiment with some fantastical elements. Hope it's a fun read.
And yeah, I thought this was a great response to the prompt as well. Just write something that tickles your fancy. Write something fantastical
Just make
and
shit
out
up,
there.
basically.
Yeah,
that's what
make
we're
it
here
up.
for. It's fiction. I was actually expecting a little bit more of that.
Yeah, surprised that we didn't get more fantasy or that kind of thing.
What I feel like we got more of was romance. Like I felt like there were a few people who were like, I'm going to test myself and write in a new genre. And
Yeah,
they wrote
maybe
in
our
romance.
fantasy writers went with romance this time around.
Maybe. And as a result, there weren't many fantasy stories this round. And so this one stood out for that reason.
So we'll get into this story line by line and tease it apart. I think for Amanda and I, there were some elements to this story that we found a bit confusing. So it would be good to go through and highlight where we maybe needed some more information.
And we've talked about beta reading. And we said in the long list episode, we were answering Sarah's question around beta reading and, you know, how do you go about it kind of thing. And I would strongly recommend that for this reason, right? Because there are a couple of clarity questions that I think a reader would be able to say, hang on, I couldn't quite follow what was happening here. And then you can just fix that, right? Because I think for the author, it's all very clear. And I think it's not always evident when you're writing a story what's missing, because you've got the picture in your head and you're not seeing where that link's not being made for someone for whom that picture has not been formed. So we'll provide that now, but like ideally you would get that from a beta reader before you submit. But of course that's a luxury because a lot of people are submitting like 2 seconds before the deadline. So there's that to consider as well.
Yeah. All right, so the title of the story is Say the Words. And what's good about this title is it is meaningful. It does link back into the story. That's how the story ends with the line, I say the words and my eyes reflect fire. And it may not be apparent from reading, but some of the words in this story are capitalized as would reflect additional meaning, like the words in this case is capitalized. We have
Sight.
Sight is capitalized. Also, catalyst, the catalyst. You know, indicating that these are words with special significant meaning within the world of the story.
Yeah, so I guess my challenge to that title is, you know, we present that final line and we'll get to the end of the story, but it's I say the words and my eyes reflect fire, but we don't as readers know what those words are, and therefore it's impossible for us to discern the significance of those words as well. Like there's an extent to which we can maybe infer what it is. We've got this sight in the beginning and like this foreseeing of what's going to come. And when it comes to the words, like we imagine that that's some kind of like incantation against this demon. But because we don't know exactly what the words are, we can't connect those dots on what do these words mean. And I think that's important because I think when you're setting that up in the title and when you're delivering that at the end, but when you're not necessarily delivering like the meaning, that's a problem because it becomes like a question for the reader of like, well, it's unsatisfying, right? Like I don't really know what happened in this story. You've left me to guess, but you haven't given me enough information to like educated guess kind of thing of what might happen next. So I would put that as a challenge. But what I will say is that this story was written really well from my perspective as a fantasy. Okay, and I'm not a fantasy reader, but I thought that it was delivered quite succinctly, like the world building was done quite quickly, which is, of course, essential in a piece of flash fiction. I thought the character names were great. Like I thought this world that was starting to emerge was quite compelling. So I'm not sure, S.A. Braden, if you usually write in this style. I suspect maybe you don't if this is something you're attempting as the write what you know anti-prompt. But you do it well, and I think that's a real strength here because Ed and I, neither of us are really particularly fantasy readers. So it's important to us to see that handled well because for us it's really about the story that comes within that genre.
Yeah. I will say, though, in this opening paragraph, I would have liked a little bit more to latch onto in terms of like, what is this world that we're in? Because there are a few options and, you know, we're reading a lot of stories and they're all set in different worlds. Some of them are set in space, some of them are set in real world, in history, all that kind of thing. So whenever we start a story, we need to get grounded in, all right, where exactly are we? Is this an alternative world? Is it Earth, but changed? And so I wasn't really sure necessarily with the opening. This portal is opened, allowing creatures to come in, but where are we? Are we in the real world? Are we in a fantasy world? I think that does become more apparent as you go that it is a fantasy world, but I think that, you know, you could do a little bit more to ground the reader right up the front to say like, hey, this is fantasy.
Yeah, and that's tough because you're working with very few words, but it's something to think about. Like how can you in like a sentence or two give us a visual of your world? Now, one of the shortcuts that we've talked about before is you give us something that's familiar. So like if you gave us, for example, a Lord of the Rings world, in like a sentence where there's like people living underground and, you know, there's short-statured people and like you'd sort of get a pretty quick visual because we're primed for that. And to be fair, I think in this situation we're primed for like this kind of dystopian world where shit's hit the fan and it's kind of like our known world but also a little bit old. Like, you know, we've got this old world kind of view, but in the future, like that's not unfamiliar. So I think you're working with that already, which is great. And then it just becomes about, okay, well, just give us like a key setting, give us a bit of a visual of like, where are we? And that's probably all it would take to just drop us in and let us see visually like where we are. What's the opening scene of this movie? And once we've got that visual, we can just go from there. Because I think it is quite evident pretty quickly like the context. Yeah. And that's the main thing, but it's just that visual that goes along with that context that may be a little bit missing here.
So what I think is interesting as well about this opening paragraph, and I'll read it out again now because it's really information dense, right? And what you managed to do in a couple of lines really is to cram a lot in. So we've not stayed 21 days in a village since the catalyst, the day the doors opened and breathed forth fire and creatures we don't know that emerged from inky black. They take many forms, always appearing at random. I'm sure this is one. So that's a lot of information. You're basically wrapping up that whole backstory. So if you like pass all that, we've been in this village for 21 days and that hasn't happened.
And I'm getting antsy because like some shit's about to go down.
And that hasn't happened since the catalyst. And what that catalyst was is like there was a portal and that opened and that breathed forth fire and we got a lot of creatures of all these unknown origin that kind of randomly appear out of this portal and now there's one standing in front of us. So like that's really dense and that's a double-edged sword, right? Because you're able to impart a lot of information in such a short amount of time. But also that means for a reader, as you're going through this, there's a lot of stopping and absorbing and passing what's just been said.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's dense. I also would call it efficient, right? Because we are working in flash fiction territory. This isn't a novel. If you had a novel, that would be completely insufficient, right? Like we would be expecting a whole prologue and what have you. Yeah. In flash fiction terms, I think you've done a great job. I think, sure, we can expand that a little bit, but we can't expand it a lot because there's really not a lot of room to go from here. So I think that's valid. I think maybe there's a tiny bit more breathing room that's required here. And I think the way to do that is to build that world building into the action of the scene, because we then go on to have a little bit of some dialogue and some interaction with another character, which is great. But you could bring some of the world building into that as well, interacting not just with each other, but with the setting as well.
All right, so we move on, and basically one of the monsters that appears through this portal that our characters are presented with right away, is a child. And the main character's initial response is, let me kill it, because it's a thing that's come through the portal.
Which I love, by the way. Like, that's such a really great early establishment of conflict, like right up front. Amazing. Yep. That's what you want. You want to immediately know, okay, here's our problem that we're going to be dealing with for the rest of this story.
And so I can hear the steel ring against its scabbard. The reverberations trigger my sight. So there's a little bit of filtering there of the character happening, and we won't go into that in too much detail because we've spoken about it on the last couple of Daredevil episodes. But, hearing the steel ring against its scabbard rather than just describing the steel ringing, you can be a lot more direct and present by avoiding that filtering. But we're introducing now the concept of sight, which is capitalized and presumably like a vision that the characters experienced a moment. So there's a lot of world building going on, right, of this world, which, as we've said in the past for fantasy, is one of the challenges of flash fiction, trying to build a world, trying to insert all this detail into a scene. It's much harder to do than just say, hey, this is the real world. You're really building this world from the ground up. And that's great. You've done a lot of it there. But what it does often is take away from the time that you can spend developing character.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges we see in this particular story is we've got this character of Egret, right, who's like challenging. We've got Amethyst, who's the point of view character, and then we've got Egret, and they're in conflict because Egret's like, hey, this is a child, and Amethyst is like, no, it ain't. Like, I know what's going on here, and that's fabulous conflict. But I don't know who Egret is to Amethyst. Like, that's never established. Like, is this a love interest? Is it a brother? Is it a... we've talked about elders later on. Like, who is this? And I think that's really important because as a human being, like, I want to know that. Maybe it seems extraneous information, but to me, that's like the most important information. Like, who is this? If it's a love interest, like, that's super compelling. They're having a little lover's tiff over this child. And I also think that the idea of this child coming in and that being like offensive to our main character is also really compelling because, of course, we're taught to imagine that the arrival of a child is like this blessed sacred event, right? That everyone should be very happy about. So when in this case, we're not all happy about it, that's a great hook. That's compelling. Like that's not what we expect. And so that's really interesting. But we don't have any sense of Amethyst's like backstory beyond, okay, we've had some creepy shit come out of this portal, so we're skeptical of what else is coming out. But is there some other reason why a child is particularly triggering that? And I just think that's such a compelling character. Like in horror, right? The child, especially, it's always a girl, right? It's never a boy for whatever reason. There's like the creepy child who's got something going on is like such a strong character. And I feel like that's the character we're touching on here. But it's not, we haven't fully grasped that. Like we haven't gone with that. And I'd like to see a little bit more of that, I think. So that character development maybe is coming at the expense of some of that world building. I don't know.
So, all right. So then we have this vision that it's experienced by Amethyst. The fires seething, writhing in black night, grief-stricken cries emanate from trust broken, blood, wine, red, spilling into puddles. And so we've got this vision of like violence that's taken place. And Amethyst gives up very quickly, saying, oh, well, the village elder has said that, so that puts the end to my objections. But does it? If you've just received this strong vision with your sight, presumably you know something that they don't. Wouldn't you vocalise that objection?
Well, that was my question. So we've got this sort of almost poetic, these lines coming from the sight. And my question was, are other people seeing or hearing this?
Yeah.
Like, is she saying that out loud? Is that something that's like projected almost like a movie for everyone to watch? It seems very internal. And therefore, if it's internal and if she does nothing about it, it has no bearing on the plot. So I guess my question is like, how is this impacting the scene? And it's not. She has this vision, but nothing comes of it.
Yeah.
And then even if later, like we might imagine, all right, she has this vision and later that's exactly what happens. But we don't see that as being exactly what happens in the ending either. So it's never really paid off. So I guess I would just say for this site, how is that impacting? Like, how is that a domino that knocks the next domino in this story? And I don't think it does.
Yeah.
And if not, like, how does it like leap the dominoes to the end? And I don't think it does. And so without that, I would say, I don't know that it's really adding value. Like, we've got a vision, but we're not using it.
Yeah.
So maybe we don't need it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just that gut feeling is enough, and we don't need that vision on top of that. Or if you want to go down that path of this site, absolutely go for it. But that needs to like knock the next domino over or be paid off satisfyingly by the conclusion.
Yeah.
And just regarding what the elder says next, it's that problem I have with the unattributed dialogue sometimes.
Yeah.
But that line feels like it's the line Amethyst is saying.
Yeah.
Because it's like she's had this vision and then what happens next? Like we're thinking maybe she's going to say something.
Yes.
And then it turns out it's a village elder. And in fact, we've not been introduced to this village elder before. So I don't even know who that is. Is she a village elder?
Yeah.
Is Egret a village elder? I'm really not clear on that when I'm first reading. Now, as I progress through the story, I imagine that to be someone else who's like standing in conflict to Amethyst. But when you read that the first time, it's not clear. And I think that's really important. I think you need to signpost that a little bit by placing the village elder before that dialogue. So the village elder does some action, steps forward and speaks, you know. I think signposting these changes can be really helpful.
Okay, and so the village elder asks the girl, who we find out it's a girl, what's your name? And dark clouds seem to cry and
that's a little purple.
And what's left of the ramshackle wooden homes begins to smoulder. So some bad omens, some bad signs happening here, but it is left hanging a little bit, whereas it could be a little bit more leveraged in the scene. Like people may be questioning, like, whoa, hang on a second, what's going on here?
Yeah. Is it just Amethyst that's seeing this stuff, or is this happening in real time? If so, why aren't people freaking out a little bit? And presumably they've had the same life experience of like shit's coming out of the woodwork and like threatening us. If so, why aren't they more alarmed? Yeah.
So it responds, Lita, she says, and I want nothing more to kill her.
One thing I guess I would have liked to have seen with that line there, and I want nothing more than to kill her, kill them young before they turn feral. I think I would have liked that sooner because we've set up this conflict between Amethyst and children.
Yeah.
And while I reckon that's a really cool hook, you know, surprising and really interesting, I'd like to know a lot sooner why Amethyst feels that way. And this idea of they're going to turn feral immediately is part of that. So I think that needs to come sooner and not be sort of woven in later on. I think it would be really great when Amethyst first reacts to know why. Like, why are you reacting so strongly against this child? Like this poor innocent child. Like, let's see a little bit more of your perspective then.
And it raises a lot of questions, and it also, this dynamic that's being set up here of like, you're a child now, but you could become dangerous. And presumably this has happened before in other ways. Like we're getting random monsters come out, but this is not a monster.
Yeah.
But at the same time, is this a situation that we've seen before?
And why has Amethyst got this very different perspective from everyone else in the village?
Yeah, it reminds me of the dynamic that you get in like zombie movies when someone's just been bitten by the zombie and they're in denial about it. Like, no, you're still okay. And then there's the one person who's like, no, we've got to kill them because we've seen this a million times before. Is this that dynamic that's happening here? Like, has this happened before or is it new? You know, I need to know a little bit more about this world and what they're actually facing in reality. And what happens next is that Egret rests his hand on my shoulder. I know my face must be fire and rage. I exhale, choosing to trust him. And I think that goes back to what you've said before, like, who are these people to each other? Why are you trusting him in this context where you've just given us all of the reasons not to?
Yeah.
Like the warning bells are going off in your head, like you're seeing these visions, seeing the clouds parting, and you're choosing to trust Egret. There must be a really strong reason for choosing that. And we as the reader...
Is he like super hot? I need to know
you go
immediately.
To. You're like, he must have some serious abs.
One thing I really liked is the dialogue. So I think in this story we get really strong dialogue, we get realistic dialogue, this kind of whispered, this is not that
Yeah.
Egret whispers. Like, I love that. Like, that's very intimate. And I would, again, as you've just said, like, really like to understand their relationship a little bit more for that to hit home a little bit more.
Yeah.
I've just assumed it's a love interest situation, but maybe not. I don't know. But, like, that's where my brain is.
Yeah.
But I guess I would like that to be more clear.
We also don't know, like, what their job is.
Yeah,
They've
what
been caught up in this whole vanquishing demons exercise, or are they professional fighters? Like, yeah, we don't know enough about their context.
And it seems too, like we talk about the villagers, and earlier in the story we say, I'm talking to Egret, but I make my voice loud so the remaining villagers can hear. And then now we're saying a couple, husband and wife, break away from the assembled crowd. Now, I feel like this is a very small group of people, and that feels like it lacks intimacy. Is it just a village? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like you'd know each other pretty bloody well by this point.
They've been there for 21 days, haven't they?
Yeah. It's such a minor point. Probably doesn't matter. But when we're just talking about generics, like the villagers, a couple, it's hard as a reader to latch onto that. Like, we've only got 500 words. Like, every character in this story should have like a really strong impact on the plot. And if not, like, why isn't Egret doing that thing? Why isn't Amethyst doing that thing, or the elder? Like, we've brought in another couple to be the prospective parents of this child. And I guess I'd want to know, well, why are they special?
Yeah.
And there's not enough time to make, 6, 7, 8 people special. And that's the challenge of flash fiction.
Yeah, we usually say focus in on 1 or 2 characters, or, maybe 3. But at this point, we do have the 2 main characters. We have the girl, we have the village elder. We now have a couple being thrown into the
Plus the
the
villagers.
mix.
Yeah.
And nameless villagers around.
Yeah. So there's an opportunity there to tighten that up. You could, instead of the village elder, for example, or like just merge the village elder with one of these parents is an opportunity. And I think it's important because I think like every time you introduce a new character, you're fragmenting the reader's attention to something new. And that just weakens, I guess, the emotional impact.
Yeah. So the next line, the couple come out and they say, Lita was our daughter's name, and I can't help but notice how much you look like her. We lost her in the fires moons back, but it would be our honour housing you. I've got a minor nitpick here, and I'm not sure if you would agree with this, probably not. I find the word moons a bit triggering because for the reason that, okay, maybe I'm in a bit of a rant here.
Go for
but
it.
we have a word for that, and the word is months, right? And when you say moons, you imply that you're in a world where the word months doesn't exist.
Yeah, clearly.
But why would all the other words exist and not the word months? This is just something that sticks out to me because the word moons often comes up in like fantasy writing.
Yeah,
right?
which
Many
this
moons
is.
ago. I know, but why? Why not months?
Well, I think it's a fantasy thing, but I would say, and I'm not a fantasy reader, but it's a shortcut here.
Yeah.
Like we're in flash fiction, you're talking about like how do we set things up really quickly, this world building. If you tell me they're talking in moons instead of months, well, the world building is quick. I know that this is not the world as I know it, and it is a fantasy world.
Yeah.
That shortcut is very evident to me because I think for most fantasy readers, that's pretty nothing. Because it's so common.
I guess that's why I'm calling it out, because it is a cliche, right? And I find it as a bit of an overdone thing, right? Like what if you had said, oh, many suns ago, but you would just say many days ago, and why wouldn't you do the same thing for months? I get that it does help establish that it is a fantasy location. It's just one of those pet peeves of mine that when I read the word many moons ago, I think, well, we have a word for that, right?
Yeah, but like, let's put it this way, all right? Here's why you might say moons instead of months. If you are living out in nature, you're not counting by it's the 28th of February or it's the 31st of August. Like those days cease to mean much. Like that, the Gregorian calendar is something that suits people in a modern world who have clocks and calendars. If you are living out in nature, you're going by the moon. It's a full moon, it's not. Like that's how you're tracking time potentially. You might be tracking by days, but are you still marking off your calendar 28th of Feb?
No, but
I mean, maybe
I
if
guess
you want to track your birthday.
No, but you would still have a word for it in the same way as you have a word for day that is not just the sun.
Month and moon are not the same thing because the cycle of a moon is not the same as the cycle of a Gregorian month. No. So if you're living out in the wilderness, a Gregorian month means nothing to you.
But I mean, the Romans had a word for month that didn't mean moon. I mean, all I'm saying is you have a word for day that's not many suns ago. Why wouldn't you have a word for month, that cycle of a month, a lunar cycle that isn't just the word moon.
But they do. It's moon. Look, we're not going to agree here. I get you. I'm not a fantasy reader. That kind of stuff doesn't satisfy me. Like when I read that, I don't get joy from it. And I feel like if you're a fantasy reader, that kind of thing brings you joy because it's just like, yes, this is what I'm here for, this kind of alternative perspective on the world. And you're calling it out because it's not realistic. Of course it's not, because it's fantasy.
I'm not calling it out because it's not realistic. I'm just, it's a little bit of a trope. It's a bit of a crutch, I think.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Look, agree to disagree.
I'm bringing it to your attention, but you may well disagree with me.
I think it works in this story, and I'm not sure how the use of months would benefit this story, honestly, except to just appease you, which clearly is important. Anywho, moving on. Mooning on.
Okay. This next paragraph, we've had 7 moons have passed, right? So there's a bit of time passing, and now we're kind of getting into a little bit of internality here. We're taken out of the scene.
And this is where I started to get a little bit confused, I think. So we're doing some time jumping here. So we're saying 7 moons ago, so roughly 7 months.
I would say exactly 7 months.
Give or take. But we're going into the past 7 moons, and then shortly thereafter we're saying we were half a night through the second moon when fire and the smoke of death began to fill the sky. So we've gone back 7 months, then we've jumped forward to 2.5 months, and then we sort of lose track from there. It's almost like we jump again to the present, but that's not clearly signposted. And I think that's a problem because I got lost, and when I read it back, I still can't find my place. And I think if you're going to jump around in time, you need to have a really strong reason for doing that. And you need to do it as little as possible in a piece of flash fiction. So jump once if you can. Like give us the setup and then jump and do what's happening now. Or give us the present and jump back and come back, and that's it. Like we can't be sort of jumping between timelines purely because we don't have enough time to really grasp where we're at. And I think as a reader, like when you're coming to a story like this, you need to be following where you're at. And every time we do a time jump, you're asking me to kind of completely disconnect from what has just come and then reconnect with something new and then back again. Yeah. And it's a lot to ask in like a sentence or two, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so then we get to, I guess, the climax of the story where we have this demon all grown up, presumably has morphed into this little girl has morphed into a demon. And what I really like about this is, I guess, that weird morality that the demon has of saying, well, I want to repay your kindness. You say you've lost a daughter, so I thought I'd give you another little girl. So the demon gives them the elder's daughter. You said you're missing a daughter, so I killed this one's parents, and now here's a daughter for you as payment.
This is where I got a little bit lost because we've got a character who's being presented as being the replacement daughter initially, and then it's not, and then it kills someone else to be the replacement daughter. I got really confused by that, and we've said it's a demon. Is the demon Lita? Like that's actually not clearly established. We've assumed that, but it's not clearly established within the story. So I think it starts to lose that thread there a little bit of what exactly is happening, and it's partially to do with that time jump.
Yeah.
But it's also partially to do with a little bit of missing information around, okay, like Amethyst has assumed this was going to be a demon, I guess. That's never actually explicitly stated. And then presumably that happens, but then the demon's killed another child and the elder, or has it killed the child, or has it killed the elder and taken their child? Like these are important questions.
Yeah.
Like it's not something you can just kind of assume or gloss over. Like I need to know who's dead here. Like that's kind of critical in this story.
Yeah, I agree. It is difficult to follow and pass, and it takes a few readings to try and like tease apart, and that's definitely not ideal. So I think that's definitely something that the writer here needs to work on, is that clarity and making sure that all of these beats are made explicit and understood for the reader. I think the idea at the core there is basically pretty compelling. The fact that they've trusted this girl. They've said, oh, it's just a girl. You know, Amethyst has suspected strongly otherwise that it's actually a demon, reading between the lines here. So the couple has taken them into their house, and the demon, as it's grown into a demon,
has become feral, you might say.
Well, but also in this kind of corrupted way has wanted to repay their kindness and has gone, well, thanks. And in order to repay you, I know you wanted a girl, so here's this girl, and I've killed her father. So now she's all yours. Thanks. See ya. kind of
Yeah.
thing, which is, I think, a really compelling idea. It's just it needed to be more clear and it needed to be more strongly in the story. And then we have the ending there where Egret disarms the demon.
He's regretting it, basically, and realizing he was
Yeah. And
wrong.
Amethyst said, well, you're not going to stop me this time? No. And then they kill it.
Amethyst, I just want to point out, she refrains from saying, I told you so, and that is a noble act. But yeah, I think that's cool. Like, we've paid off the beginning. Amethyst was right. I think something worth noting, though, is that throughout this story, Amethyst hasn't really done much.
Yeah.
So Amethyst has expressed her concern at the outset. Then we've had the villagers acting and the demon acting or what have you, like over a period of time. Things have happened. Amethyst has done nothing but witness that. And as you say, she didn't really act on her sight or act on anything further that happened beyond her initial misgivings. And then it's like, I told you so.
Yeah.
Like, well, you didn't really do anything about it. So you can't really.
Yeah, you didn't even say anything.
You didn't say anything after you had this vision. You didn't tell anyone about the vision. You just let it happen. And I think that's important because I think you always need to think about how your point of view character is acting and how they're impacting the scene. You know, point of view character isn't always the main character. Sometimes the point of view character is more like a narrator. But in this case, the point of view character is Amethyst, who has this sight in the beginning and who speaks the words at the end, but who does nothing in the interim. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
We need to have some sort of back and forth, some sort of conflict that continues throughout the story to keep that edge, to keep that sort of conflict present and not just kind of like have this middle where it's happening without her input.
Okay, and so we arrive at that final line, which is, I say the words, my eyes reflect fire, which kind of harkens back to the title. But yeah, there is a problem there, and I think you mentioned at the outset. That's also the first time, apart from the title, that we are introduced to this idea of the words.
Yeah,
So we
have
don't
the
know what they
sight.
are.
We had the sight before.
Yep.
But the words is a new thing.
So we understand, I guess, what's happening there. Like there's some magic words, there's some magical ability that Amethyst has in fighting demons. So I think in that world building, you've introduced all of these concepts of the sight and the voice. And I think maybe setting that up earlier might have helped that ending be a little bit more satisfying.
And to be honest, maybe this idea of the sight, like since that's not paid off in the end, and since the words are not set up in the start, like maybe we need to choose one of those and have it set up in the start and paid off in the end, whether it's the sight or the words.
Yeah.
It needs to appear twice and not to have both of those things kind of muddled together.
Yeah.
But, you know, like, again, this is all nitpicking. Like, I did find this to be a compelling story. Like, as we've said repeatedly now, neither of us are fantasy readers. But I found this a pleasant read. I didn't find this like particularly jarring or anything like that. Like it made sense. There were some elements where I got a little bit lost along the way, but the story itself made sense and the characters were strong. I loved the character names. I loved that you very succinctly set up like the world that we're in. And I think all of that was really well handled. So I think there were some aspects of plot that probably needed to be tightened up here just to really hammer home like exactly what's happening here. But as an idea, it was evocative. It was like emotional. Like we've got this child who's like, you know, trying to ingratiate itself into this family. Like all of that's really compelling. So I think that was really well done.
Yeah, there is this complete story here. And from the setup, there is this story arc of like the child arrives and, you know, the conflict that spans from that and that kind of comes to the head at the end. And I think that's a really compelling story. I think the main areas for improvement, number one is clarity, you know, making sure that the actions are clear and trying to, especially in 500 words, especially in Flash, narrow that focus down to like the important parts that matter so that there's no ambiguity when you read through it. It's clear exactly what's happening. And I'll say that the other one is character. I think there is some more that can be done there to develop your two main characters, you know, expound on like what their relationship is. And maybe that comes at the expense of some of these other side characters that are being introduced in the story.
Just as you're speaking, it's just occurred to me, like, what if you really narrowed it down, right? And we have Amethyst and Egret are a couple and they are the couple who has lost a child.
Yeah.
Like, how could you really tighten the screws on that, right? They have this conflict where Amethyst just does not trust anymore.
Yeah.
And Egret's like completely destroyed by the loss of their child and just desperate to have another child in their life. Like that powerful emotion that would come from perhaps what's happened in their backstory could really come into this scene, and that would give Amethyst much more agency in the scene, like much more of a direct role, rather than just like, oh, okay, this other couple have taken what is potentially a demon into their home, which is, tangentially threatening to me. How about it's directly threatening to you? This child is in your home. And I think that's a possibility, and that's a different story, right? So that's a suggestion that's maybe going off on a little bit of a tangent, but just think about always with flash fiction, like how can we just get everything and just pack it in as much as possible into these 500 words? And that's potentially an option for doing that. You want to talk about the prompts?
Yeah, let's talk about the prompts. So we've got a couple of instances of the word prompt. I think the main one probably that the author was going for here was the steel ring. It's mentioned in the opening paragraph.
Like, the sound of the steel ringing against the scabbard.
Yeah, so it's the sound as opposed to a physical thing. We also have the word appearing, but that's probably just...
one of those accidental, there it is.
Exactly. And so the action prompted door opening, in this case, it's quite a unique and creative one. It's the otherworldly portal that's opening, allowing all these demons in. And it's actually, capitalized as well, right? It's the gate. So it's an element of the plot.
Yeah, and we did say in our long list episode that there were quite a lot of portals this round, but there weren't many fantasy portals, honestly. There was a lot of this portal to the afterlife kind of situation. But this idea of being quite central to the plot of the portal opening and, basically like underworld creatures coming through was not common. So it did stand out for that reason.
And then finally the anti-prompt. And the anti-prompt was all about like writing about something that the author didn't know anything about, which is shape-shifting demons, something that none of us know about.
Well, we know a little bit more now that we've read this story. But like it was rare to read a fantasy story in this round. And I think it was fun. Like I did find this story to be quite compelling. I found the characters to be interesting. And this idea of a child being a threat to the village, like that's always going to work well, I think. Like for whatever reason, girls with long hair and like hair in their face. Like why does the hair have to be in their face? I feel like this character has hair in her face, like in the ring. But, it's for whatever reason, super creepy. And that vibe came through in this story. And this was another one that was a maybe for the long list and didn't quite make it. And I hope that we've given some ideas as to why. And I think as with like the other stories that we've talked about so far in the Daredevil episodes, it's little stuff, right? Like this isn't so far off the long list, and comparing it differently on a different day, you might rate it more highly. But I think in terms of delivering a satisfying piece, in this case, probably some of that clarity was a big factor. And then maybe just some of those finer details, like finessing it to really give us that satisfying like experience of the characters and what their emotional experience is, would have perhaps lifted this story up. Because the writing's great. It's beautiful writing. Like I don't have a lot to say in terms of like nitpicking the sentence structure or anything like that. It's really well written.
So thank you, S.A. Braden. We had fun with your story and we can tell that you had fun writing it. So hopefully some of the feedback we've given helps you with your story next round.
And hopefully it helps some of our listeners as well. Like obviously all at your expense, unfortunately. And everyone else can just hide and reflect quietly on their own stories and the things they may have done that would have been similar.
And we'll be back in a week's time with our fifth and final Daredevil for the January round. So until then, ride on.
Right on.
We hope you enjoyed this special Daredevil episode of Not Quite Right. If you have thoughts on this story, follow us on social media and join the conversation. And if you'd like to participate in the next round of the competition, head over to our website at notquiteright.com. That's WRITE.
Something doesn't seem quite right.